On this video, I want to discuss a little bit the concept of bitachon, trusting Hashem, based on the beginning of our weekly reading, Vayishlach, and in particular, I wanted to touch on the huge dispute that existed in Jewish thought with regards to this concept, and on a somewhat related, maybe, dispute of Ramban and Rashi in interpreting the specific verses in the beginning of our parsha. It is known, of course, that the author of Chazon Ish, usually we call our sages by the books that they wrote, Chofetz Chaim, Chazon Ish. So the name of this great sage, who lived relatively recently, is Rav Avram Yeshaya Karelitz. But everybody is accustomed to call him by the name of his book called Chazon Ish. So one of his books that usually is placed in the category of Sifrei Mussar, the books of Mussar, of Jewish ethics, is called Emunah Ubitachon. I read once an article where the rabbi, Rav Eliyahu Tavger, claims that this is not really a Mussar book. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a book that was written against the Mussar. And to just add my 5 cents, I think it depends on the definition here. Just like, for instance, the Hasidic movement. What's the word Hasid? Hasid is a biblical word which means a person who is very righteous. But there was a specific movement with specific ideas called Hasidic movement about 300 years ago or so it started. And there were a lot of sages who were against this movement. But they were not against Hasidut in general, of course. It was not that there were Hasidim and those who were against Hasidim. It would be fantastic if everybody would be a Hasid, if everybody would be righteous. But they were against a specific movement, the Hasidus in the Monero sense. So I think the same thing is with regards to Mussar. I mean, the book of Chazon Ish is definitely a book of Mussar in the more general sense. It is a book of Mussar. Mussar is a biblical term again. It appears many times, and of course, the entire book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, is basically a book of Mussar. So nobody is against Mussar per se. How could you be against Mussar? The most important books in Judaism and the most important ideas are in Mussar. But there was a specific Mussar movement, maybe 100 years after the Hasidic movement. Within Lithuanian Jewry arose a movement based on first teachings of Rav Yisrael Salanter and then his students that was called Mussar movement. So Rav Yisrael Salanter was a similar to Baal Shem Tov figure, like the founder of Hasidut is considered Baal Shem Tov, and the founder of Mussar is considered Rav Yisrael Salanter. And that movement had specific features, although there were some differences and some disputes within different masters of Mussar, just like there are between different groups within Hasidus. But they all had certain things in common that others were against. It's well known there were opponents of Mussar movement. They weren't against Mussar per se, of course, as I said. So in the more general sense, of course, the book of Chazon Ish is a book of Mussar. But it was a book that was written with a primary purpose against certain ideas of the specific Mussar movement, in the more narrow sense, the Mussar movement. That, in fact, is true. The Chazon Ish's book is not a Mussar book in that sense. It's, in fact, a book against some of the ideas. And one of the ideas that he tries to argue with there is, in fact, the idea that comes from one of the groups of Mussar, very important school of Mussar, a Novardak school. Novardak is a city that now is part of Belarus. It's the city, by the way, where the main rabbi was the author of Aruch HaShulchan, one of the most important codes of Jewish law at that time. But the school that we're talking about, the rabbi that's associated with that school, Rav Yosel Yudel Horovitz. He was not the rabbi of the city, like the author of Hashulchan was the rabbi who decided halachic issues. And the head of the yeshiva that was dealing with Mussar was Rav Yosel Yudel Horovitz. And he had some very maximalist ideas about certain things. His Mussar school was, even within Mussar schools, it was probably the most maximalist, if you could call it that way. And among other things, there was a huge emphasis on bitachon in his school. Now again, bitachon, the term itself is a biblical term. There are so many verses in Tanakh, in the Psalms, for instance, about trusting Hashem. But the question is, what exactly does that mean? And what exactly are you supposed to expect? So there's a wonderful article that you could get online in English called The Limits of Religious Optimism, the Chazon Ish and the Altar of Nevardok on Bitachon. Altar Nevardok is, of course, this Rav Horowitz that I just discussed. He's called the Elder of Nevardok. So the article written by somebody named Daniel Stein is a very, very good article, in my opinion. It was printed in Tradition Journal, associated with the Yeshiva University generally. And they have archives which are now free, so you could just search for it in Tradition Archives and load the PDF format of this article. I read it years ago, but I decided to talk a little bit about it now that we're dealing with this Parsha again. So the big surprise, I guess, is the fact that Yakov is so scared when he finds out that Esav is on his way with apparently not friendly intent, to say the least. Yakov gets extremely scared. And he prepares for different things, of course. Rashi says that he prepared for the possible war, or he tried to bribe Esav, which actually worked. And he also prayed to Hashem, so he did everything. He did whatever is up to him. He didn't really want the war, if he could avoid the war in this case. But if necessary, he would be prepared for war as well. But the question is, why was he so scared? So Chazal say, of course, that he was afraid that maybe he had some sins. What kind of sins could Yakov possibly have? Well, everybody could possibly have sins. And besides, all this time he was far from home. He wasn't doing the mitzvah of respecting his father, as opposed to Esav, who had that mitzvah, who was closer to Yitzchak. He wasn't always with Yitzchak. It seems that Esav was going back and forth between the area near the Dead Sea, where he ultimately settled, and where Yitzchak lived. But at any rate, Esav definitely had more contact with his father and had that great mitzvah of respecting his father. And there may be other things that Yaakov was afraid that he may have done wrong. Whatever the case may be, even when he was promised good things, he was afraid maybe he did something wrong. In particular, there is a Rashi here that discusses the word katonti. When Yakov says, I became small from all the things that you did for me, Hashem. So, according to Rashi, Yakov is saying two things in a sense. That first of all, you, Hashem, did so much good for me. Now my merits have diminished. And also, I'm afraid that maybe my sins are right. That he was so modest that he was afraid that maybe he has sins that may have caused that he doesn't have enough merits to be saved from Esav. So regarding the words katonti, Ramban argues with Rashi and says that it cannot mean that I was diminished because of your great favors that you did for me. According to Ramban, katonti here is more like a modest way to say that you did so much for me, whatever I didn't even deserve, and not only things that you promised, you also did a lot of things you didn't promise. So he was talking modestly that Hashem, you did for me more than I deserve, please save me this time also. But according to Rashi, katonti means that I became small, meaning my merits were diminished because of all these favors that you did for me. So the source of Rashi, in fact, is the Talmudic sugya in two places, in Tractate Shabbat and Tractate Ta'anit. And it says there that a person should never rely on miracles and never stand in places of danger. For instance, if there is a wall that's about to fall, don't assume that you could just pass by and hope that Hashem will save you. And even if Hashem saves you, this will decrease your merits. And to support this concept, the Talmud brings this our verse, katonti mikol hachasedim mikol haemet. I became small from all these great things that you did for me, Hashem. The majority of commentators seem to actually explain about katonti as Ramban does. But the arguments that Ramban brings against Rashi are, of course, rebuffed by those sages that wrote commentaries to Rashi, what they call super commentaries. Super commentaries to Rashi generally try to explain the shita of Rashi against Ramban. Ramban, for instance, argues that one of the promises that Hashem made, that Yakov was referring to, is the promise when he was already in Haran, when he was told to go back and Hashem will protect him. And since that time, there did not seem to be any major favors that Hashem did to him. That was just recently. So, what diminishing of merits is Rashi talking about? And on that, Marsha, to the Talmudic Sugya in Shabbat, brings that in fact there was a great saving of Yakov when Lavan wanted to hurt him. So Hashem did him a great favor after already he promised to protect him. So maybe that saving was basically used up all his merits, remaining merits. Whatever the case may be, going back to the article that I just mentioned and the general the concept of bitachon. Of course, I can't summarize the entire article. It's a long article with references, and like I said, I think the article is very well done, and I recommend reading it for those who want to study this topic. But just to make it simple, the maximalist view, which is presented here by the author of Navardok and by certain other rabbis, is that in fact bitachon is everything. If a person really, really trusts Hashem, he'll be saved no matter what. So all those cases when people were not saved, in fact, they were lacking bitachon in a certain sense. Whereas the more practical, the more pragmatic maybe view of bitachon, which is what Chazon Ish presents and which is what probably most Orthodox Jews follow, is the view that you just have to accept what Hashem does. We don't know what results your actions will bring, even if when you pray, we don't know what the answer will be. What we can do is basically say that whatever Hashem does is for good. We're supposed to trust that Hashem knows what He's doing, basically. that's the main idea. But to assume that things will just be good because you have this great bitachon, that we can't do. Now, I'm not sure if the old dispute of whether one should go to doctors also is somewhat related to this question. The majority of Jewish sages, and of course the practice of the vast majority of Orthodox Jews, is when a person is sick, he goes to doctors. HaTorah natna rishut lirofeh. The Talmud says that the Torah gave the possibility, the permission to the doctor to treat. There's nothing wrong with going to doctors. That's why the Torah actually mentions when a person hurts somebody else, he has to pay for the doctor. So we see that going to doctors is normal. It's not a lack of bitachon in any sense. And that was the pragmatic view of Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who was a doctor himself, by the way, the Maimonides. On the other hand, there is a shita of Ramban, which is extreme to a large extent, but he thinks that a truly, truly righteous person who really, really trusts Hashem, he doesn't even have to go to doctors. Now, Rambam used to make fun of this, and in his commentary to the Mishnah in Psachim, he says that just like a person who is hungry, he's not supposed to just pray, he's supposed to eat, otherwise he'll die. So too, if a person is sick, there's no way not to go to doctors. Going to doctors is absolutely normal, and it's complete stupidity, he thought, to say that one should just throw his trust on Hashem and not go to a doctor. But with all that, Ramban was also a great sage. He was not the only one who held this way. By the way, Ramban himself was also a doctor, but he thought that the doctors, for regular people, doctors do exist. And among other patients, there could be non-Jewish patients. The doctor could make money on his practicing medicine. But the really righteous person who is on a very high level, according to Ramban, will trust Hashem and not go to a doctor. I mean, you could imagine that this is not an opinion that was widespread or practiced by pretty much anybody. And by the way, even according to Ramban, this is talking about the individual with regards to himself. He's allowed to not to go to a doctor if he's on a very great level of trust. Ramban did not allow that with regards to others. In fact, like I said, the Torah says if a person hurts somebody else, they have to pay for the doctor. You cannot be trusting Hashem when it comes to somebody else. Just like if a poor person comes to you and says that they need a loan or they need money, they need tzedakah, you cannot tell them, well, trust Hashem. You can trust Hashem if you're on a very high level, but when it comes to others, you have to actually do the actions to help everybody else. So it's only on your own individual level, as somebody who is on an incredibly high level of trust, in theory, might be able to not even go to doctors. So I'm not sure, maybe the dispute, while it's not necessarily the same exact dispute, but maybe this dispute is related to the dispute in the schools of Mussar, and the author, by the way, of this article also brings that among Hasidim there were different opinions also. As far as I know, the Breslov Hasidim in particular were very strong on the same idea of trusting Hashem in the most maximalist way. And in fact, I'm not big surprise that Rav Nachman of Breslov generally was against going to doctors. Although he himself did go to a doctor when he was sick, and in Vienna, I think, and there were reasons for it which he didn't want to describe. But whatever the case may be, this whole idea, of course, the maximalist approach of trusting Hashem, while it does exist, we cannot close our eyes on the fact that it does exist in Jewish thought, is definitely not the mainstream idea. And that's why I guess the article was named The Limits of Religious Optimism, that while trusting Hashem is a very important concept, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should avoid the pragmatic steps, whatever is needed, and just hope and trust that Hashem will do things for you. Rather, we have to do our part and hope for the best, but be prepared for anything and know that whatever Hashem does is good. I guess maybe that is what the teachings of Chazal is, that in this world there are two different brachot, two different blessings that our sages instituted, one on good tidings and one on sad news. So on the good tidings there's a brocha hatov yamitiv, Hashem does good, and on the sad news we say Baruch Dayana Emet, whatever Hashem does, He is the true judge. But in the future world, we'll understand that everything is for good in a certain sense. Even things that seem bad to us, we don't know anything. Only if we find out once we die why and what happened. So in the future world, there will be only the brocha hatov yamitiv. And if you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.